Trucker Dump for March 3rd, 2014, episode 100. What makes the Evil Overlord evil?
Welcome to Trucker Dump, where you'll get one driver's insights and sometimes humorous views of truck driving and the trucking industry, and pretty much anything else he feels like dumping on you. This podcast is brought to you by AboutTruckDriving.com. Resources to help you understand the world of truck driving through the use of stories and a pathetic attempt at humor.
Howdy doody, folks. Todd McCann here. You know, I was beginning to think I was doing this whole trucking thing wrong lately, but then some guy flipped me the double bird for something stupid he did. So, I guess I'm still doing it right. You know, after I released the latest podcast, I realized I screwed up. Why? Because as part of Trucker Dump 99, 4 Ways to Be an Awesome Trucker, I included a section called Truck Stop Etiquette. Now, clearly this is a topic that I should have saved for a full podcast of its own. I realized this when I went back and saw how long that section was and how little I actually got to cover. So if I were you, I'd be expecting another podcast in the future that focuses on trucker etiquette. What else? Oh yeah, remember how I said that last podcast that I didn't think that Trucking Santas met their goals? Well, Heather Pontriff, who started Trucking Santas, reached out to me on Twitter to tell me that they actually did meet their goals. So, congrats to Trucking Santas, and thanks again to everyone who donated this year. You guys rock. Okay, I guess we better get scooting on this one. Believe it or not, this is my longest podcast to date. By far. Well, it's my longest blog post anyway, so I'm guessing that will translate into my longest podcast too. Hopefully y'all stick it out because I think you're really going to get a kick out of it. I know I had a blast writing and recording it. I guess I can be excused a super long podcast since it is my 100th episode. And seeing how it's a landmark number, I thought I'd give you guys what you really want from the Trucker Dump podcast. But I'm getting ahead of myself once again. All will be explained in What Makes the Evil Overlord Evil. Y'all aren't fooling me, you know. I've known it all along. The fact is, you guys don't come here to the Trucker Dump podcast to hear my insights and sometimes humorous views of truck driving in the trucking industry. You come hoping to hear some little morsel about the mysterious life of the Evil Overlord. Now, I've tried to tell you she's evil, but there are always doubters who assume I'm exaggerating. Well, I'm devoting this 100th episode to satisfy us both. You will finally get to learn more about the Evil Overlord, and I, once and for all, will prove that the Evil Overlord is, in fact, evil. And for those of you curious what the Evil Overlord looks like, you might want to run over to the blog post and take a look. There's a picture over there right at the beginning. Link in the show notes, or just go to abouttruckdriving.com and type in TD100 into the search box. Now, to those of you new to the podcast, the Evil Overlord is my wife of 20 years and my co-driver for 9 of those. Her real name is Lorinda, but this presents a problem. Having an odd name like Lorinda lends itself to people screwing it up. She's been called Lauren, Loranda, Lorena, Lorena, Lamanda, Lalinda, Dorinda, and every other name you can imagine that sounds even remotely close. People even say it wrong when they're reading her name from a sheet of paper, for Pete's sake. I just can't fathom what's so hard about it, but there you have it. I guess I'll just chalk it up to the fact that people can be dumber than a head of lettuce. Perhaps a bigger problem is for kids. I first recognized this back when we were dating. That's before I realized she was actually the Evil Overlord. Had I known at the time... Our best friends at the time had a little girl who adored her. She'd sit in her lap for hours and stroke Lorinda's hair, but she could never quite say her name right. No matter how hard we tried, it always came out as Rolinda. It was so cute, though, we eventually just went with it. Years later, after the Evil Overlord's title was spawned, our nephews couldn't pronounce it either. The first one, Jake, called her Lolly, and it stuck with Jared and Joel, too. I guess it's just way easier to say with a mouthful of slobber. But now that the brats are 14, 12, and 8 years old, and have graduated to actual human speech filled with what they perceive to be quick wit, they have taken to calling her Lafawndah, which, for those of you chained up in a basement, is a character in the movie Napoleon Dynamite, which, by the way, is a hilarious, quirky little movie. And for the record, the Evil Overlord is neither tall nor black, but apparently she is attracted to nerds. Now, if you aren't familiar with that movie, there are some links in the show notes to the Napoleon Dynamite trailer. I think it's a trailer. Might just be a YouTube video of some highlights. And there's also a short little thing on who Lafawndah is, which is a great character in that movie. So check those out. There are only 3 categories of people who manage to call the Evil Overlord Lorinda. One group are the peeps who know her casually. The second is the 3 lonely people she's met in her 29 years who share the same name as her. The other, even smaller group, they did the nasty once and hatched her. Although her dad still insists that her real dad is in prison. So, enough about her name. She knows that I call her the Evil Overlord, and she embraces it wholeheartedly. It's especially satisfying to her when the nephews call her that after she's done something particularly evil. Which leads us nicely into the subject of today's topic. What exactly makes the Evil Overlord evil? Let's start with the origin of the name. When the Evil Overlord first wakes up, she can be as cranky as a centipede with bunions. Now, I knew this by the time we were married, but I didn't know the extent of it until she became my co-driver. Almost every afternoon when I'd holler back to her that it was time to get up, I'd hear a loud, "No!" Or perhaps I might be told to go someplace that's a lot hotter than heaven. The amount of curse words associated with this refusal to get up usually corresponded to the quality of the highways I'd driven that day. She usually stayed grumpy until she got a shower, which meant that the days we had to skip showers were never much fun. To this day, no one wants to wake her up. Ever. And if you don't believe how vicious she can be in the morning, just come over to my house sometime and look at my 3 nephews sitting quietly on the couch until the Evil Overlord gets out of bed. Trust me, the only time they aren't loud and obnoxious is when Lafawndah is still asleep. Speaking of being in the truck, I once woke up with a pillow on my face. Seriously. She was laughing maniacally as she held me down. Now, she's tried to convince me it was all in fun, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be alive if I weren't just a tad bit stronger than her. Come to think of it, that might have been right around the time I bought that life insurance policy. And speaking of my head, the Evil Overlord likes to drop stuff on my face while I'm sleeping. It all started innocently enough. When we were shut down for the day in the truck, I often went up to the top bunk to sleep so we could keep our driving schedule intact. Now, being a woman, she always brought a bunch of crap that filled up the top bunk. We had a portable freezer refrigerator up there, along with a couple of large duffel bags, a dirty laundry bag, and I'm pretty sure I saw a fireplace up there once. Anyway, being a typical lazy man, I moved only enough stuff so I could lay down in a space as wide as my shoulders. That meant my head was right by the cooler. One day, when she was trying to get something out of it without waking me up, the cooler lid came off its hinges and bonked me right in the forehead. There's a link to a picture of that cooler lid that accidentally fell on my head in the show notes. Now, she tried to apologize, but it was kind of hard when she was laughing her butt off. Apparently, my sleepy reaction when hit had been hilarious. At least to some people it was. From then on, she would drop stuff on my face every now and then, just to see how I would react. Granted, I was thankful that it usually consisted of rolls of paper towels, toilet paper, clothing, or the occasional slightly heavier object, like a claw hammer. Now keep in mind, this all comes from someone who hates to be woken up herself. Which brings me to, she wakes me up for her amusement. Now if I had a quarter for all the time she's done this to me, well, let's just say my retirement fund would be a lot further along than it actually is. Here's why she does it. I fall asleep quick. Real quick. She doesn't. Yes, that's the full reason. If I get in bed 5 minutes before her, I'm usually snoring like a misfiring chainsaw by the time she walks into the room. She'll walk over to my side of the bed, smack me on the forehead, and walk away as I'm hazily wondering what the heck just happened. Or if she's already in bed, she just prefers to give me an open-handed slap on the chest. She also loves it when she catches me sleeping with my mouth wide open. She thinks it's fascinating to stick stuff down my throat and try to touch that flappy thingy that hangs down in the back. Naturally, this isn't a very pleasant way to wake up. Now, if I woke her up like this, I'd be picking my teeth out of that little hangy-down flappy thingy. At one rough period in our lives, I was working 1.5 jobs and going to school. And because of this, I had to sleep in 2 short shifts. When the mood would strike her, she'd anxiously wake me up and tell me I was late for either work or school, even when I wasn't. I'd either panic and stumble out of bed, or I'd wake up and start talking gibberish about something that wouldn't even make sense to a mental patient. In the latter case, she would often ask me questions to keep the amusement going. Now, if that isn't evil, what is? Next, she willfully puts me in danger. Nearly every day in the truck, she would make hot tea for one or both of us. She always put it in those styrofoam cups and lids we bought by the Mega Box at Sam's Club. Now, to test the integrity of the lid's holding power, she used to tilt the full cup of hot tea over my body while I sat in the driver's seat. And this wasn't a slight tilt either. I'd say 45-degree angle was about par for the course. Thankfully, those lids never gave way. I'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank WinCup for their quality products. She sicks our cat on me. I'll admit it. Our cat is a little crazy. Seriously, as in incest crazy. So the cat isn't quite right. Hammy's pretty big for a cat, too. And since he's an outside cat most of the time, he's super powerful. The Evil Overlord once watched him jump from the patio railing up onto the roof of the house. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Super Cat. There's a link in the show notes to Hammy the cat looking quite menacing. But since he's usually outdoors, he also still has his front claws. One thing the Evil Overlord likes to do is to get him all hopped up on catnip and then put the laser pointer on my junk while I'm not looking. Needless to say, pandemonium ensues. Now, like I said before, no one still wants to wake her up no matter what, even though she doesn't seem to have a problem doing it to me and my nephews. More torture while people sleep. When kids get older, they want to watch scary movies or TV shows. The Evil Overlord is very selective, but she doesn't mind letting them get a bit spooked. Nothing too gory or anything. Of course, it's sometimes hard to get them to sleep in a dark room after they've been screaming like a bunch of little nieces. Often, just as she gets them calmed down, she starts to close the door and she'll say something sweet like, "I love you guys, and never mind that werewolf that's been creeping around outside." More squeals ensue as the calmness utterly vanishes. Once they're calmed down again, she's been known to wait until they're asleep, and then she'll go back for more jollies. Sometimes she'll bust the door open and start yelling through the megaphone the nephews got her for Christmas. I think that's her favorite Christmas present ever. Other times, she'll just creep in quietly, lie on the floor, and reach up to one of their legs with a hairy glow-in-the-dark glove with giant claws. Mind you, if you did this to her, you'd think a werewolf actually was in the house. She just loves to scare kids. Now, we live way out in the sticks. I mean, the road to our house has tree branches over the top of the road, and there are trees and bushes on both sides. At night, there isn't a light in sight. It's quite creepy, really. One time, she was in the car with her aunt and her 7-year-old cousin, Kyle, who just so happened to be terrified of clowns. Last I heard, he still was, and he's in his 20s now. Well, she stopped suddenly and turned the ignition and the lights off, pretending like the car had died. Then she jumped and yelled, "Did you see that clown?" Naturally, Kyle started wigging out. Now, the Evil Overlord was pretty sure that her aunt would swoop in and stop her child from being tortured, but to her shock, she went right along with it. Needless to say, that kid was scared well, let's just say probably didn't have to poop for a while. As with most kids, though, Kyle loved it. The Evil Overlord would often jump out and scare him. After he quit shaking and managed to pull himself off the floor, he'd yell, "Do it again!" Kids are weird. When Kyle was a teenager, she bought him an Insane Clown Posse t-shirt to rub the whole thing in. By the way, there's a link to an Insane Clown Posse t-shirt kind of similar to what she got him. Although, the one she got him was really creepy. It was a lot creepier than anyone I found online. It spooked him when he opened it. It was kind of funny. Another thing she likes to do is wait until all the nephews are in the back of the house with Nanny. That's their grandma. Now by this time, they're used to having her jump out at them and scare them, so she started turning off the lights. They all creep into the room, and she always managed to be hiding exactly where they didn't look. She'd scare the crap out of them, and they'd all hate her for the next 2 minutes, including Nanny. Eventually, they learned to turn on the lights as they entered the room. But since she's evil, she's now graduated to killing the power on the fuse box. I fully expect this to escalate to the boys carrying flashlights and holstered belts 24/7. Here's another thing she does. The Evil Overlord alters the rules at her leisure. For instance, she plays the slug bug game, but we can't punch her anymore. She always spouts some nonsense about, boys shouldn't hit girls. What a crock. The rules are, she can either punch one of us or give her punches away. Naturally, having the power to issue extra punches tends to get her just about anything she wants. But I'm sure she's never thought of that before. She also determines who can and cannot play the infinity game. And if you try to argue with her verdict, she says, you can't play the infinity game. Infinity. After she wins a round, and she somehow always manages to win, she pinches the loser hard, usually right on the back of the arm. No fair, she's the only one that's got fingernails. Not too long ago, she waited until little punks were all in bed and under the covers, and then she busted in and unloaded on them with a fully automatic airsoft rifle, screaming, say hello to my little friend. And for the record, she did make sure they all had their heads under the blankets. By the way, did I mention that shooting airsoft guns in the house is strictly forbidden? She does all this, we just accept it. And when I say we, I'm including myself in this nonsense. I have no clue why we allow this abuse. I think I need to see a shrink. She just loves to torture the nephews in general. After taking the boys past an old abandoned house down the road, she told them stories of the werewolves that live in our area. The youngest, who was 5 or 6 at the time, didn't want to get eaten, so the Evil Overlord convinced him he needed to do the wolf dance to appease them. This involved him getting naked, going outside, and running around in a circle 3 times while howling at the moon. It was a bit chilly outside, but I have video with full frontal to prove he did it. Now, I'd love to post the hysterical video, but I hear the other inmates don't treat you very well in prison if you post pictures of naked kids online. Another thing she does happens at Christmas. Ever since the boys were old enough to do it, she set up a scavenger hunt to find the last of their presents. Now this is one of their favorite parts, not only because they get to run all over the place, but also because they have to answer a trivia question before they can proceed. Although this year, each member of the family silently acted out a room in the house where their next clue was. As you might expect, my pantomime involves squatting and grunting. Hey, it's called Trucker Dump, you know. In the few Christmases that they were all at the right age, they would inevitably have to strip down to their boxers and go outside in the freezing cold, and sometimes snow, to rummage through someone's car. Hey, it wasn't our fault they forgot to take the keys to the locked cars. I'm not really sure why these boys still like Christmas. I guess they're just weird. Well, scratch that. I know they're weird. One of her latest tortures came when our oldest nephew, Jake, had his best friend over. We all got in the car and his friend said, play some good music. And normally this is fine because the Evil Overlord calls herself the Magic DJ, as in she has a knack for playing the right song for the mood. But in this instance, I'm All Out of Love by Air Supply came on at full blast. As we both sang at full volume, they all covered their ears and screamed like someone was ripping their toenails out. After it was over, they were all groaning about how horrible it was. But they were soon drowned out by the Bee Gees doing Tragedy. I have to admit, it was pretty awesome. By the way, if you're not familiar with either of those songs, there is a link in the show notes. Another time, she caught Jake's friend sleeping with his hand down his pants. She's holding that picture as blackmail, along with the many compromising snapshots of our nephews. And by the way, every friend Jake has ever brought to the house so far is now totally in love with the Evil Overlord. At least that's what Jake says. And from the embarrassed look on their faces when I ask them if it's true, I'd say Jake is right. She's an instigator. Anytime there are shenanigans in our family, you can bet your little brother's life that the Evil Overlord is behind it. In the intro to the last podcast, that's Trucker Dump 99, 4 Ways to be an Awesome Trucker, you may remember that when I got home on New Year's Eve, I was attacked by 4 masked men with airsoft rifles. Yeah, my nephews and their friends didn't think of that. That was the Evil Overlord's idea, which, of course, was enthusiastically embraced. Another thing she likes to instigate is bathroom cruelty. Now, you'd think that me and my 3 nephews would already be doing this, but oddly enough, we never remember to. Never fear, though, the Evil Overlord is always happy to remind us that so-and-so's in the shower and there's lots of cold water in the kitchen sink. She usually plans well enough in advance to have enough time to suggest ice in the water, too. Such a planner she is. Last time I was home, I doused Joel, which is the youngest, while he was showering. He was quite pissed at his nanny for letting me sneak up on him. But as you might have guessed, it's usually me who's the victim of these frozen showers. And of course, she's exempt from this because she's a girl. The thought of seeing the Evil Overlord naked is petrifying to the boys. And as for me doing the honors, well, personally, I like having a sex life. Now here's something. She preys on people's stupidity. Anytime we step out of the car for any reason, we always have trouble getting back in. We all know this, but we continue to do it. Recently, Jared asked the Evil Overlord to pull over because he left his iPod in the trunk. As soon as he got to the open trunk, she pulled up a few feet. And again. And again. Hey, he knew better. Sometimes she'll be nice and wait to pull forward until we open the car door to get back in. Oddly enough, they all still want her to drive everywhere. Although that could possibly have something to do with me needing to protect my CDL, while the Evil Overlord tries to launch the car into outer space on a hilly road, or does the surprise brake check that tests the tensile strength of their seatbelts. Man, they love that. But undoubtedly, the best example of her preying on human stupidity happened to yours truly. This story is told at every family gathering, and it never fails to bring everyone to hysterics. She'll actually tell anyone who will hear it. Here's the situation. The Evil Overlord, her dad, and her mom were waiting for me out in the driveway. Now, it's important to note that they were in her parents' car. More on why that's important in a bit. Now, you know how you do that thing when you hit the interior garage door opener and walk out of the garage before the door closes? Yeah, I was going to do that. Of course, we all know you have to step over the laser beam safety feature so the door doesn't go back up. Well, I did that like I always did, but the door started going back up. I looked over at them, shrugged, and went back to do it again. This time I ran faster and jumped higher. I was sure I had cleared it, but the door started rising again. I looked over at them again, and this time all of them were looking at me with puzzled faces. Now what I didn't know was that as soon as the Evil Overlord had seen what I was going to do, she quietly chuckled, turned to her parents and said, "Watch this." Her dad said, "Watch what?" She pointed to the garage door opener she held in her lap. Now apparently this brought on fits of laughter from all of them. Now if you know the Evil Overlord's family, there isn't a quiet laugher in the bunch. They all laugh with loud guffaws and their heads toss back, which makes this story even more amazing. Somehow they all managed to subdue their laughter and put on straight faces by the time I made my first jump. But every time I walked back into the garage, they busted up, only to miraculously recover by the time I looked over at them again. Now I just couldn't understand how I could keep hitting the laser because each time I ran faster and jumped higher, all while ducking low enough to avoid hitting my head on the descending garage door. Well, after the 4th or 5th jump, I eventually smelled a rat. I looked over at her with disgust and yelled, "Do you have the garage door opener?" The Evil Overlord and her evil parents all looked at me with confusion, and then she shook her head no. Now here's where the stupidity kicks in. I should have known better, but they all looked so serious and concerned that I assumed they were telling the truth. I mean, they weren't my pickup truck after all. They were in her parents' car. Why would they have our garage door opener? And while I could see the Evil Overlord or her dad pulling this kind of prank, I could not see her mom going along with it. I mean, she's always been on my side before. I still call her a traitor for this incident, which of course only makes her head toss back with guffaws of laughter. Traitor. Well, I'd say my stupidity lasted another 4 or 5 jumps. By the time it was all over, I was trying all sorts of jumping, from curling up in a cannonball position to doing a scissor kick jump like I was trying to clear a high jump pole in a face-down position. I swear at one time my body was completely parallel to the ground, yet that blasted door just kept raising, and I was getting pissed. They somehow managed to keep their composure until the very end when I walked up to the car. Then they busted out. I somehow find this funny now, but I don't recall thinking that way at the time. This past Christmas, this fiasco was being told again, of course. Yes, amongst the same people that always hear the same story. The nephews were getting a kick out of it too. I tried to play it off when I said, "Yeah, that was pretty funny." The Evil Overlord said, "You didn't think it was funny at the time. You called me a mean bitch." To which I calmly responded, "Well, you are a mean bitch." More guffaws. For some reason, this struck Jake as particularly funny. He just couldn't stop laughing, even after everyone else had stopped. I guess that's just what happens when a non-cusser suddenly drops the B word. I still consider this incident to be the pinnacle of her evil career. Well, now that I think of it, there might be one other incident, but it's far from print-worthy. Even the trucker dump won't go there. Here's something. The Evil Overlord is obsessed with people's butts. I'll warn you now, there's something wrong with the Evil Overlord's family, if you haven't figured that out already. Every time anyone bends over in front of her, you hear the words, "credit card swipe," as you feel a straight-fingered hand swipe up your butt crack. Trust me, while the credit card swipe sucks, it's much better than the old-style jab your finger straight at it move. The woman always had a surprising ability to hit the sweet spot on the first jab. I always felt like I needed to file a police report after each instance. Apparently, she learned this violation of personal space from her mother and is merely passing on a tradition. And for the record, I don't think anyone is exempt from the credit card swipe. She's done it to the boys, her cousin, her aunt, and uncle, me, my sister, my brother, and even my mom, who was quite surprised when it happened. Frankly, I don't know why that shocked her, since she's known the Evil Overlord for over 20 years. About the only one who isn't subjected to the dreaded credit card swipe is her dad, because, well, let's face it, no one wants to get anywhere near his butt. Speaking of butts, she doesn't allow farting around her. Believe it or not, she is actually evil enough to be able to enforce this rule, with 3 boys in the house. 4 if you count the 45-year-old boy. Whenever one of us has to let one fly, we always go into another room. And we're also careful to make sure it doesn't follow us back into the room either. Sure, there's more methane in the air than on a cattle farm when she's not around. Boys will be boys. But we're also careful not to do it when we know she's almost home. That's because she can smell a 5-year-old air biscuit as soon as she walks into a room. Seriously. Now, in her defense, she doesn't have this rule just to be cruel. She just so happens to be one of those super smeller people whose sniffer is about 10 times as strong as the average bloodhound. And, of course, this rule doesn't apply to her either. She's more than happy to bust one in our faces when none of us are expecting it. Now, if all of this hasn't convinced you of the Evil Overlord's evilness, perhaps you'll believe it coming straight from the horse's mouth. I'll rest my case with this text message exchange. But you know, despite all her evil tendencies, I think the nephews and I will keep her. If for nothing else, for the challenge of one of us taking her down in the infinity game. Now you can go and look at this text message if you want to. Or I'll just read it to you here. She was trying to get a hold of me and I wasn't answering. So finally I wrote back and I said, "I was swapping loads, showering and fueling. I'm not at your beck and call, woman." And she writes, in all caps, "Yes you are. I am the Evil Overlord. Remember your place, filthy mortal." And then she writes, "I will smite thy nuts, fool." And of course she's got some nice emojis in there, which might imply that I'm a jackass.
Hey, yo, bud, where do you want this load of feedback?
Alright, since that was really, really long, you'll be happy to know there's only 2 comments today. So what say we get with it? Okay, first we got someone calling themselves D. Cheney. He, or she I suppose, writes, I start truck driving school in 2 days. I have knee problems. Left knee is worse than the right. I'll deal with the issue if I have to make a living and provide for my family. But my question is, how likely is it that I'll end up with an automatic, or at least a semi-automatic? Well, first, D. Cheney, congrats on starting truck driving school. So, what's your likelihood of ending up with an automatic transmission? Well, I'd say that all depends on you and the questions you ask. If you're going to a typical truck driving school, you'll likely be visited by a bunch of trucking recruiters. Here's where you come in. If they don't mention automatic transmissions in their spiel, you have to ask them about it. Now, I know this seems obvious, but I remember how timid I was about asking too many questions when I was at school. It's like I tell anyone who asks about finding a good truck driving job. You have to prioritize what's important to you and make sure the prospective employer meets your main requirements. If a driver insists on having an APU, that's an auxiliary power unit, they need to rule out any company that doesn't have them. If you insist on taking your two ugly mutts with you, you don't want to wind up working for a company that only allows one pet in the truck. And if you want to make sure you're going to get an automatic transmission, you need to ask what the likelihood is that you'll get one as a new driver. Now, one last thing. Don't fall into the trap of deprioritizing your desires. If you wind up going with a company that pays more but sticks you with a 10-speed manual stick shift, you'll be miserable in the long run. Now, there is no such thing as a perfect trucking company. You're likely going to have to sacrifice one thing you want in order to get another. Now, I'm not saying that companies with automatic trannies pay less. I'm just saying don't let money or anything else take your eyes off your main desire. So to sum it up, there are plenty of trucking companies out there that have automatic transmissions in their fleets. Find out who they are and ask them if you'll get one if you choose to work for them. Now, if they don't give you an answer that's acceptable, keep looking. And remember, don't be enticed by higher pay or other great perks. If your priority is an automatic transmission, stay focused on that. I hope that helps. Good luck, and don't hesitate to holler if you have more questions. And to finish up, Joanna, I can't ever hear that name without thinking of that song. Great song, by the way. Anyway, she found abouttruckdriving@gmail.com, which makes me think she probably found that through the contact page on my website. But remember, you can always use truckerdump@gmail.com. That's the one I always say on here. She writes and says, Hey, I have a huge question. My husband was getting ready to go to work with OD, and they were going to train him to get his CDL. OD. I think that's Old Dominion, but I'm not sure. She never really said. She goes on to say, he drove for American Tire for 13 years, which is a smaller truck, but the day before he went to work with OD, he fell and almost cut his arm off. So it's been close to 2 years now, and he can do a little with his hand, but he cannot pass the DOT test due to the strength part. Is there a driving place that will hire him and let him drive an automatic? All he wants to do is drive a truck. What should he do? Who can help him? He has adapted to using his hand different ways, and he can do just about anything. Where should he go? He needs to get back to work. Thanks. Well, Joanna, dang, it sounds like a horrible accident your hubby had. It appears like he's adapting well, though. That's good to hear. As for your query, I'm afraid the DOT strength test is probably going to keep him from getting his CDL. The DOT guidelines are there for a reason, as crappy and as stupid as those reasons are sometimes. So basically, there isn't any way that I know of that a trucking company can shirk the DOT's rules. Now, the only thing I can think of off the top of my head is that he might be able to get a job driving a smaller truck, like a delivery truck or a concrete truck. Now, although these jobs probably will require him to use his hands more, they may not be subject to the DOT rules. Now, here's a shout out to all you people out there. I don't know that to be true. I mean, do you have to pass the DOT guidelines to get, say, a CDL Class B? I don't know. I'm a little too lazy to look it up, apparently. But if you guys know, write in and let me know, and I'll pass the word on to Joanna. But I did possibly find some hope. And I went on to tell Joanna, I found a good article about trucking with disabilities, and there's a link in the show notes to it. It's a really long URL from the military.com website. Just Look in the show notes. I'm not going to say it all here. In that article, they list a consulting firm called Job Accommodation Network. That's JAN for short, Jan. You might check those guys out. According to the aforementioned article, it sounds like they know a thing or two about getting around the DOT rules. The article even says that the FMCSA is getting better about making exceptions to their rules. Sounds like your husband might be one of those exceptions. Now, I've placed a link to JAN, or Job Accommodation Network, in the show notes, or you can just go to askjan.org. Now, personally, Joanna, I agree with you. If all a guy wants to do is drive a truck for a living, he ought to be able to do it if he can find a company that's willing to hire him with a less than perfect hand. Sadly, it's not up to people like us to establish the DOT rules. You and I have far too much common sense to work for the rule-making bodies. Well, Joanna, keep in touch and let me know if that Jan thing helps you at all. Good luck to you and the hubster. Now, if anybody else knows anything about getting around these DOT rules for, disabilities and stuff, write in, because I'm not quite up to par on these things, as you can tell from my answer. So, write in, let me know. Well, that does it for the comments. I would like to take just a brief second here to thank everybody who has stuck with me for these 100 podcasts. I know there's a few psychos out there who have actually listened to all of them, gone back from the very beginning. I can think of Eric, who goes by @DarkStaff on Twitter. Chris, who goes by Driver Chris Mack, and I said it right for once. He's Driver Chris Mack on Twitter. And let's see, who else? Oh, recently, I found out Shannon is going back and listening to all of those, or he's trying to anyway. And his handle is Holden657. That's HOLDEN 657. If anybody else out there, I probably missed some people. I know I probably have. But anyway, write in. Tell me that you've listened to all of them. And I don't know, maybe I'll make a list of all the wackos who have bothered to go back and listen to all of them. That'd be kind of funny, actually. But anyway, just wanted to thank y'all for sticking with me through this. Wanted to thank Alan Bristol, who goes by Alan Q Bristol. It's BRISTOL on Twitter. He helped me get through a lot of this process and kept me motivated when I lost motivation trying to do 100 of these podcasts, of which I did, I don't know, maybe the first 80 or 90 of them, all before I released them. So it was a trying time for me, and he helped me through it, so I do appreciate that. Like I say, appreciate all of you. And if you got comments, suggestions for a podcast, anything, just want to tell me I'm a dork, write in, and here's how you can do it. All right, who out there's got an evil spouse themselves? Let's hear some funny stories about the evil ones in your life. Ship them to truckerdump@gmail.com or go to abouttruckdriving.com, type TD100 into the search bar, and leave your stories there. Now, I doubt if you can fit a good evil story into a Twitter message, but if you want to try, I'm at Todd McCann over there. That's 2 D's, 2 C's, and 2 N's. And if you want to give me a 100th episode gift, tell a friend about the podcast, write a review on iTunes, or simply send wads of Benjamins. And as always, thanks for sticking with me this long. So until next time, drive safe, stay out of my way.